Hello, everyone. How are we doing tonight? Good. I know I feel the same. Thank you so much for being here for this incredible speaker. Jeannette Walls is here. My name is Julia Ray Hoddenfield. I'm the manager of adult programming here at New Canaan Library. And before I continue, I have to say it, silence those cell phones. And also take note of our auditorium exits. On our right, you can go right out to downtown, grab dinner if you'd like. But on your left, you can go right out to the parking lot. The library will be closed at the finale of this program. Okay, now to the fun stuff. I am so thrilled to welcome best-selling author Jeannette Walls to present her latest novel, Hang the Moon. Jeannette Walls became a household name after publishing The Glass Castle, which remained on the New York Times bestseller list for over 8 years. Her subsequent novels, The Silver Star, Half-Broke Horses, and Hang the Moon, were instant hits, keeping readers like us engrossed with her skillful storytelling and masterful character development. You will have ample time to ask your questions at the close of Ms. Walls' presentation, so keep them in mind, write them down if you can remember. We'll come around. And just on a personal note, Jeannette Walls is one of the many authors that made me fall in love with reading and become a librarian. So it's so surreal to be here introducing the author. And it is because of the generosity of so many people in this audience and in this community that allow our library to do what we do. And so it is National Library Month, and Library Giving Day is Wednesday. So I hope you will consider making a contribution to the New Canaan Library to support events, services, and collections that we all love so much. Okay, thank you for listening to me. And without further ado, Jeannette Walls, thank you.
Thank you so much. I love your gorgeous city, and I'd like to thank Elm Street Books and the New Canaan Library for bringing me here. I'd also like to give a special shout out to a very dear friend of mine who made this all possible, who also happens to be the publicist who's sitting back there. But mostly I'd like to thank you all. I know there's a lot of things for you guys to do with your evenings, and I'm truly honored that you chose to spend this one with me. What I'd like to do with our time together this evening is share with you a little bit of my journey, how I got into this here novel writing business. I never thought I would write made-up books, novels, fiction. I always saw myself as a truth teller and a fact finder. But the Hang the Moon actually began almost 55 years ago. Like many of the people in this room, I was the kind of kid who would read anything with words on it. And when I was 8 years old, I was sitting at the kitchen table, I think in Battle Mountain, Nevada, and the something that happened to have words on it was a vase. It was actually a whiskey bottle, which had been repurposed as a vase. Mom stuck flowers in, and I turned it around, and on the back it said, "Federal law forbids sale or reuse of this bottle." And I said, "Mom, we gotta throw out the flowers." And she said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "We're breaking the law. We gotta throw out the flowers." And she took the one, turns around and read it and said, "Oh, that's a stupid law. You can ignore it." What are you talking about? How can you just ignore a law? How can you pick and choose which law you're going to ignore? And she told me about this wondrous time called Prohibition, when it was illegal to buy or sell liquor. And I wanted to live during Prohibition because I figured, my dad was a raging alcoholic. I figured all our troubles would be solved. And she said, "Oh, no. It was an unmitigated disaster." She said crime went through the roof and drinking actually increased. How could that be? How could that be? And she told me about the law of unintended consequences, and I was just fascinated. I honestly, I thought she was kind of wrong, but it stuck with me. And I just kept on thinking about this time of Prohibition. And I love stories. I loved digging for the truth. I have one little slim talent in the world, and that's that I'm really nosy. I love stories. I love finding out the story behind the story. And growing up, I wanted nothing more than to be a journalist, a reporter, telling the truth. I know that many of you have read my memoir, and I'm so honored. I'd like to talk just a little bit about how that happened. I I got into journalism. I thought I'd write important stories about poverty and stuff like that. For whatever reason, I ended up writing about celebrities. I was that bonehead you see on television sticking my microphone into celebrities' faces, asking them who designed their outfits. And I'm going to some fabulous party, all decked out in my fabulous designer clothes, and I see a homeless woman rooting through the garbage. It was my mom. I asked the driver to turn around, went home, got together with Mom a couple of days later. I said, "Ma, what the heck am I supposed to tell people when they ask me about you?" And she looked at me as though I'd asked her a really stupid question. And she said, "Tell the truth. That's simple enough, just tell the truth." And I thought, I could never do that. It's too weird. You know, I thought, first of all, nobody would believe it. But beyond that, if the degree to which they believed it, I figured I'd get fired from my job. I'd lose whatever few friends I had. You know, I had everything I'd ever dreamed of. I lived on Park Avenue. I had flush toilets. You know, I went on television discussing important issues like who Lindsay Lohan's really dating. But something was missing. Something, you know, and the irony, and some would say hypocrisy, of seeking out other people's truths while I was hiding my own did not escape me. So I sat down and I tried to tell the truth, completely expecting to get fired. I didn't get fired. I went back onto the red carpet, and a funny thing happened. A couple of celebrities, very well-known people, asked me to turn off my microphone. They said, "I want to talk to you off the record." And they'd say something along the lines of, "Thank you for writing about alcoholism in such a compassionate way. Your father reminds me of mine, and I bought copies of your book and given it to friends who do not understand how I can love somebody who's done such horrible things." And I thought, dang it, I can't write anything mean about that person again. So I didn't get fired, but I got defamed. I believe the truth will set you free, but the truth cannot be summed up in snarky little paragraphs like I was doing. So what am I going to do? You know, I guess I got one little slim talent in the world. So I quit my job, moved to Central Virginia. We brought my husband and I brought my mother with me. Not with me because I'm not a saint. We put her out back in a nice little cottage, and I started touring on behalf of the Glass Castle, and people kept. I love touring. I love readers. They're smarter than I am, and people kept asking me. They'd say, "I understand your father. I understand alcoholism, but I do not understand your mother. Why would somebody with college degrees choose the life she chose?" And I thought I kind of explained it in the Glass Castle, but I guess I didn't. If people didn't understand it, like I said, I believe the truth is always there if you dig deep enough. I didn't invite my mom to come live with us for the purpose of exploiting her, but as long as she's there, what the heck? So I said, "Ma, how would you feel about my writing your story?" And she was all for it, but she was the one who said it should not be about her, but rather should be about her mother, my grandmother, Lily Casey Smith, who was a foul-mouthed, gun-toting, horse-breaking, hooch-selling school teacher. And she wasn't just a school teacher, she drove the school bus. And it wasn't a school bus, it was a hearse with the word school bus painted on the side. And it was all the time getting stuck in the mud, and she'd tell the students, "Push and pray, kids, push and pray." And it's become a little bit of a philosophy of life for me, push and pray, you know? So not only did, my mother give me a book, but she gave me a new philosophy of life. But in telling her story, I originally wanted to write it sort of oral history from my mother, but since it was about my grandmother, Mom kept on saying, "Well, I believe what happened next." And there were these little gaps that I couldn't quite fill in. And I wanted to write it in my grandmother's voice. So I called it fiction. And it was kind of weird for me to be making stuff up, but it was just, I wasn't quite sure about this, or there was this little connective tissue or this presumption, something I tried to fact check where I was getting conflicting. It really gave me an insight into the challenges that historians face. So I took pretty much what Mom told me and called it fiction. And then the Silver Star was somewhat similar. It's a story I know of, and I just cobbled it together, changed names, and called it fiction. And I thought, I'm kind of through with this, this writing business. I milked my family dry. So I'm not a serial memoirist. I'm not one of these people who's interesting. The Glass Castle's not about me. It's about my parents, and I'm not that interesting. I'm not going to write something else about myself. And readers kept saying, "You should write fiction. You should write fiction." I'd say, No. I don't make things up. I am a truth teller. I'm a fact finder. I have no imagination. And I kept saying that, and I kept saying that. And then one time, I was talking before a crowd. You should make things up, and I did that whole thing about I have no imagination. And somebody in the audience shyly raises his hand. He said, "Ma'am, forgive me. I think you probably have a fabulous imagination, but you're afraid of creativity. Oh, yeah, right, exactly. I was like, oh, I think this reader's onto something. Both of my parents were wildly creative. They all the time had characters in their heads who emerged at all times, sometimes at their behest, sometimes not. And I think I associated making things up with lying and insanity, both of which run in my family. And so I thought about this time, this Prohibition time, and I kind of wanted to tell a story about somebody who lived during this time. It has fascinated me, not just because of Prohibition, but also because it was such a transitional time in American history. You know, it was between the Great Wars, it wasn't the Depression. I thought it was like this kind of golden period where America was changing. It was changing so much. Having grown up without electricity, I know how transformative it is once you get it. And America was going through that, and I thought, would be a magical time to be alive. And ditto with the automobile. I thought, you know, and this Prohibition thing had really stuck with me. You know, it was such an interesting time in American history, but most of us know about Prohibition through an urban lens, with all these iconic figures. We know Al Capone, and we know all the, you know, the Eliot Ness and the Untouchables. But what about us folks up in the hills, like we're making moonshine? What iconic figures do we have? We got Snuffy Smith, a hoot and holler, you know? And I wanted to get a little bit deeper. So I started researching the bejesus out of this. That's where I turned to, since I don't make stuff. I researched, one of the characters is a baseball player, so I read 4 books about turn of the century baseball, and I just kept on researching it. And as much as Hang the Moon is about liquor and all that, I really wanted to make it about family, which I find endlessly fascinating. It's really not about the liquor business, it's about family. And one of the things that I really wanted to get into, this whole truth-telling business, which fascinates me. When I was growing up, my very favorite memory from my entire childhood, I wrote about it in The Glass Castle, was I was 5 years old. We had no money for Christmas presents, and my father took us all out into the desert night and had us choose whatever star we wanted. I've never been very subtle. I chose the brightest one, Venus. Dad explains to me, Venus isn't a star at all, it's just a planet. I wanted it anyway. Dad said, what the hell, it's Christmas, you want a planet, you got a planet. And he gave me Venus. It is my most treasured gift ever. And to this day, when I look up in the sky, I think, I own that, honey, that is mine. I love that gift so much, and I love that story so much that I told it at my father's funeral. After I finished telling the story, my older sister Lori, a lot smarter than me, always saw right through my dad's BS. She said, isn't that like that sorry SOB dad of ours to go give away something that doesn't belong to him in the first place? Meanwhile, my brother Brian does a hilarious impersonation of Dad being drunk and giving away planets and galaxies and stuff. So you have one incident, and you have 3 tellings of it. One child sees it as kind of inspirational and heroic. Another sees it as a cruel joke. The third sees it as a comedy. How do you tell your story? What is your truth? We are all storytellers. You know, anybody who's ever answered the question, how was your day? You tell a story. We shape our stories. We shape our stories about ourselves, and then our stories shape us. And that was something that I really wanted to get in Hang the Moon, the degree to which the storytelling controls how we see ourselves and others. I also wanted to make the main character, Sally, a tough gal. I'm fascinated by tough people during challenging times. I honestly believe that those of us who face more than our fair share of hardships have certain advantages and certain blessings. I think everything in life is both a blessing and a curse. But this is a conclusion I'd come to well before I came out of the closet about my past. I used to work at a kind of snooty magazine where people, you know, were in the social register and stuff like that. And I didn't lie about who I was. I just kept quiet about it. But this really wealthy woman, she wanted to go on vacation with me. So I thought that'd be really interesting to go on vacation with a super wealthy woman. So I was like, well, what did you have in mind? And she explains to me she wants to go on something called Outward Bound. Now, I'd never heard of this here Outward Bound thing before, and she explains to me that you pay a rather substantial amount of money, and you go out into the wilderness, and you forage for food. And I didn't want to say anything, but I'm thinking, honey, the first 17 years of my life were in Outward Bound, you know? So I called my brother and said, Brian, you're not going to believe this. Rich people got to pay for their hardships. And we thought that was the funniest thing we'd ever heard until I got to know this woman better. And she's so strong and resourceful, but she doesn't know that. And those of us who grew up having to make do, we have certain gifts. You know, when I was 13 years old, we couldn't afford braces. They cost $1,200. Our house cost $1,000, and we still hadn't paid it off. But I made my own with a rubber band and a coat hanger and a Kotex sanitary napkin. It didn't work, but anyway, we learned to be resourceful, and I wanted to make Sally a resourceful gal. I wanted to make her somebody. She was born into a wealthy family, but she left the family for a while and then came back and has a kind of idealized image of her dad. Another thing that really played into my writing of Hang the Moon is that one time a teacher, I know that there are several teachers here who use the glass castle in their classroom. I'm eternally grateful, but it has been read in classrooms. And a teacher told me, she said, I have a girl in my classroom. She's a good girl, but she's had a few brushes with the law. And I was hoping that your book would kind of open her eyes. And she said, she had this young woman read the book, and she said, this young woman, she comes back in the classroom, slams the book down on the desk and said, that is a very upsetting book to me. And the teacher said, why is that? And this woman says, there's a scene where the mother takes 3 of the children to go shoplifting for one of the kids, and that is just wrong. And this teacher thinks, oh, this is great. I can have a conversation with this young woman about crime and punishment and all those good topics. And the teacher said, what in particular bothered you about that scene? And this young woman says, when you go shoplifting for one of the kids, you got to get something for all of them. And the teacher said, we had quite the eye-opening conversation. She said, I'd always thought of this young woman as somebody who breaks rules. But after this conversation, I realized she doesn't break rules at all. She was just taught a different set of rules. And that's something that just really stayed with me. And I wanted to bring it to Sally Kincaid, who, she lives in, as I said, she comes from one of the more richer families in the community, but that family is engaged in moonshine making. Somebody who read it said, like you start reading it seems like this kind of wholesome family from the hills, and you realize when you read a little bit further on that they're outlaws, and it's kind of like the Waltons meets the Sopranos, but I just wanted, they follow their own set of rules. So like I said, I researched the bejesus out of it, and I wanted to capture Sally's voice, this woman living 100 years ago who's involved in this moonshining business. So I figured I'll read like books by women moonshiners, right? They weren't keeping diaries, okay? So the research was actually a lot more challenging than I thought it would be. There were a lot of women moonshiners, and a lot of them were not only supporting their families, but they were supporting their communities. But it was something that wasn't talked about a whole lot. After a lot of research, I did find this one community in Franklin County, Virginia, after Prohibition was repealed, it was revealed it was called the wettest county in the world, and the sheriff and the town leader and all the big people in town were involved. It was estimated that 99% of this community were involved in moonshine making in one capacity or another. So the court transcripts were incredibly valuable to me for figuring out the mechanics of it and how this all worked and how people were involved. I don't know about y'all, but if I'm reading about something, historical fiction, and something happens in a book that was set in the past, and I believe that wouldn't have happened then, I just throw it out the window. So I really wanted to make sure that it felt accurate and it felt true. Sally was originally a real potty mouth. And her go-to word, excuse me if anybody here is hypersensitive, but her go-to curse word was dumbass. And I found out this wonderful resource, Green's Dictionary of Slang, that tells when various curse words entered the lexicon and where. And dumbass was a mid-century curse word, so I had to throw it out. And it broke my heart. But it actually felt more authentic after I got rid of it. But so, like I said, I researched the bejesus out of it. In this trial in Franklin County, there was a woman rum runner. Her name was Willie Carter Sharp, and she was known as the fastest, fiercest moonshine runner in all the county. So I felt comfortable having Sally leading the moonshine runs. But Sally is not Willie Carter Sharp. There's not a whole lot of information about her out there. And like I said, I researched the heck out of it all. And I thought, I had a story. I based a lot of the characters on historical figures. I thought I had the structure right and everything. and it felt researched. It wasn't very good. It felt flat. Around this time, The Glass Castle had been optioned for a movie a long time ago, even before it came out. It kept on being a turnaround and turnaround, and finally it was getting made. And I'm sorry, this will lead to Hang the Moon. I kind of go around things, but anyway. So Hang the Moon, The Glass Castle was optioned for a movie, and Woody Harrelson was cast as my father. And I thought at first, when I first heard it, I was like, that's kind of weird cast, and he didn't look like Dad, but I guess it doesn't matter that much. Most people don't know what Dad looks like, but you know, he's a nice guy. He'll do a good job. He's a good actor. But even before I met him, he called me up. He wanted to talk about Dad. And he kept asking these really good, direct questions. He'd say things like, when he talked to you, did he look you in the eye? And when he talked to you, what did he do with his hands? And I said, he crushed beer cans, not wimpy beer cans like they have now, but back when a beer can was a beer can. And he said, like Cool Hand Luke. I said, my dad was Cool Hand Luke. And Woody said, that's my favorite movie. And I could tell he really liked that. He really liked having something, you know, to hang his performance on. But he kept asking about the walk. He told me he figured he felt if he could get the walk, then he could get the personality. He said, can you describe your dad's walk? And I said, well, Dad had this kind of long-legged, lean-hipped walk. And he said, I don't know what that means. I said, because it didn't mean anything. So I'm clomping around, and I'm trying to do Dad's walk. And you know, and I can't. I don't know how to do a guy walk, but I'm trying to describe the way Dad walked. And he could hear me clomping, and he said, oh, man, I wish I could see you. And I said, no, you don't. I look like RuPaul. You know, so I said, you know, well, finally I said, I think Dad walked kind of like Sam Shepard. I don't know if he based it, I'm sorry, like Chuck Yeager. I don't know if he based it on Chuck Yeager or they just all walk the same, the pilots from West Virginia, but Sam Shepard really nailed it in the right stuff. And again, he really liked that. He really liked that. So I was like, okay, so I figured, well, that was kind of weird. So anyway, first day that I spent on the set of The Glass Castle, it's really interesting to me. When they're shooting a movie, they don't do it sequentially. And they always shoot the most complicated scene of the day first, while the actors have a lot of energy. And the first day that I spent on the set of The Glass Castle, the scene they were shooting was when Brie Larson, that would be me, was leaving home, and the father character, Woody, was trying to convince her to stay. And the first time that I laid eyes on Woody in character, I burst into tears. He had the walk. He had the walk, folks. But he had the cigarette behind his ear. He had the friggin' facial muscles. It was insane to me. And so they're arguing, and he's trying to get Brie Larson to stay at home. And I'm starting to cry because I'm getting angry with this woman for not staying at home and being nice to this poor man who just is trying to like have a friend. Now here's the thing. Here's the point of my story. Then they went off script. And Woody started saying things that Dad had said that I hadn't told him. And I was a mess. I was just like, I was crying. I was slinging snot. It was bad. And Woody, after they finished the scene, Woody's walking away. He sees me over there crying. And he walks up to me. And like an idiot. I mean, I knew he wasn't my dad, but I started apologizing. I'm sorry. And in my father's voice, he says to me, you had to do it, honey. You had to leave or we wouldn't be here. And it was one of those magical moments that life gives you if you're truly, truly lucky that, you know, here, 30 years after my dad dies, I'm able to apologize and accept forgiveness. And it hit me so hard then. That is what this making up business is supposed to do. That is how we create characters if you're truly good at it. I do not pretend that I'm in Woody Harrelson's league or Naomi Watts or Brie Larson, but fiction writing, I believe, like good acting, is a process of empathy. It is understanding your characters so well that you know what they would say in a given situation. So I threw out the manuscript and I pulled some characters forward. I'm also very deeply indebted to a fabulous editor I had, Anne Graham. But I just thought that is how I finally found a way to breathe life into my characters, is this process, and you don't make stuff up. You borrow or steal shamelessly from life. You look, if somebody told Woody Harrelson, play a drunk from West Virginia who's also really smart. He would have done Snuffy Smith doing quadratic equations. But I asked him at one point, I said, how did you do that? And he said, I didn't want to impersonate your dad. I wanted to become him. And again, I'm not pretending I'm as good as he is at it, but that is what we try to do with fiction, and we try to give voice to people who wouldn't otherwise have it. My character, Sally, there are not the memoirs, like I said, there are not memoirs about women moonshiners out there. But if I'm fortunate, if I'm lucky, I have given these people a voice. And I spent so hard trying to get it right, trying to give these people, and I ended up loving my characters. I ended up loving not just Sally, but her sister, who was a prohibitionist, who originally was a very two-dimensional character that I got completely out of research. But the thing about the prohibitionists, many of them meant well. Some of them were nutty nativists as well, but they actually believed that that if they could eliminate liquor, that that crime would disappear, and they could use that money that had been spent on law enforcement to educate people. So it is trying to get inside the head of characters who you know and you love, and by the end of the book, if you're truly lucky, you know how they feel. And I did the audio for the book, and I knew how each of these characters sound, and I truly grew to love them. A couple of days ago, I was in Greenville, North Carolina, and this gentleman, he told me he writes fiction. And he said he does science fiction because he didn't want to have to write about his family. He said, I hate my family. I didn't want to write about them, but they keep appearing in my science fiction in the future, So, that anybody wrestling with trying to tell a story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I now believe it's closer than I used to believe. We fiction writers, as I can now say, we kind of steal shamelessly from the real world. We don't make it up. We try to give voice to people who don't have it, and we care about our characters. And we take these hardships, these things. Like I said, I believe everything in life is both a blessing and a curse. And it's entirely up to us which one we choose to focus on. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend I've come to terms with everything from my past. First time my husband tried to eat off my plate, he almost lost his hand. But we take these things, and as big a fan as I am about storytelling, for yourself, I become a bigger fan of listening to other people's stories. But I think you cannot truly hear other people's stories until you've come to terms with your own. Back before I came out of the closet about my past, I was I was becoming friendly with a kind of well-to-do gentleman. I was afraid that once he knew the truth about me, that he would drop me like a hot potato. This is somebody, his dad was a diplomat. This is somebody who went to Outward Bound, for gosh sakes. I thought, well, finds out about me, I'm a goner. So I told him at one point, I said, I need to tell you a little bit about my past. I had a kind of wacky childhood. And he said, how wacky? And I said, well, when I was 3 years old, my dress caught on fire, and I had to go to the hospital and get skin grafts. And he said, what are you trying to tell me? I said, I'm covered with nasty scars. And he said, why are you telling me this? And I was like, I don't want you buying a pig in a poke. I'm kind of damaged goods. And he said, you're apologizing? He said, oh, no, don't ever apologize if you have scars. He said, those scars are a sign that you've survived and that you are stronger than whatever it was you were up against. And I said, I wish I was just nice and smooth like other people. And he said, oh, no, smooth is boring. You've got texture. Texture's interesting. So I married him, and he pulled a story out of me, and I thought it was the wisest and kindest thing anybody's ever said to me. Until one time, I was speaking to a really well-to-do crowd, and I told that story about wanting to be nice and smooth like other people. And this woman comes up to me afterwards, and she says, she's all blinged out and got this perfectly coiffed hair, and she says, sweetie, let me explain something to you. She said, there is no such thing as smooth. She said, you look close enough, silk's got texture. So I guess that's about the kindest and wisest thing anybody's ever said to me. We all have our texture. We all are a little dinged up, and some of us are lucky enough to have the silky texture, and some of us are lucky enough to have texture that's a little bit smoother. And this is not only do you not hide it, you embrace it. These are our scars, these are our stories. and we can tell them however we choose to, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And in closing, I'd like to share with you something from Sally. I see what a nut I've become. I quote Sally and not myself because she came up with this. But she's sitting out one evening looking up at the stars. We do share that. We both love the stars. And she's admiring the stars, how beautiful. And she's so grateful that they're out that night. And it hits her, of course, they're out all the time. You know, people talk about us being in a dark time. I got to tell you, researching the 1920s when I thought it'd be so great, it was pretty darn dark. There was the gleeful sexism and the casual racism. It was pretty horrible, and it made me. I think the cure for nostalgia is research. But so Sally's looking up, thinking at the stars and how beautiful they are and how grateful she is. But the stars are out at all times. We only see them when it's dark. It's one of the gifts that we get during dark times. So just remember, you need the darkness of night to see stars by their own light. So during these dark times, look for the stars. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Ask anything. Ask anything. Nobody has ever embarrassed me with a question. One time somebody said, why did your family leave Arizona? You had some stability, some security. I said, I don't know. I can't get a straight answer from Mom. I'd like to answer your question, but I don't know. And this woman in the audience raises her hand, and she said, I know. Well, how do you know? She said, my book club discussed it. So there's a number of book clubs here tonight, and if I get stuck on an answer, well, just turn to the book club. So ask away. I'm just going to call on somebody up here.
You're terrific.
Oh, God bless you.
Thank you. You are terrific.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So tell us 2 things that helped you survive.
Thank you. 2 things that helped me survive. A love of reading. A love of reading, a love of education, that goes together, and a sense of self-esteem. And I believe if kids get that, you can get just about anything. And that's one of the reasons I call the book The Glass Castle, because when times got tough, Dad would pull out the blueprints for the Glass Castle and would go over them. And he never did build it, obviously, but I think it was not about a fancy place to live. I think it was about hope and a belief that I was destined for a better life, that, that all of this running around, that one of these days I would have something better. And I believe if you give a child that hope and a love of education, I believe the 2 go hand in hand. They can get through just about anything. Ideally, you get food as well. Okay, I will acknowledge that. but I believe I'm the luckiest person in the world. I really do. Oh, I do. Oh, yeah. If you are where you want to be, why regret how you got there, And I mean, I had so many amazing conversations with some of you earlier this evening, and somebody asked me if this is a dream come true for me. I would have to be a crazy person to dream this. No, it so exceeds any dream that I ever had for myself. But Dad told me, he said that one of these days you'll be famous. So, he did. No, he did. He told that to all the kids. Other questions?
Do you think that you feel lucky because did you feel unlucky when you were a child way back then before you understood certain things? Did you feel unlucky?
What an interesting question. I don't know if I felt unlucky. I would have really loved to have had matching socks. Yeah. That would have really meant a lot to me at a certain point in my life. Yeah. At the same time, I never felt unloved. I never doubted that I had whatever, I believed in my father's mythology. He needed me to believe in him, and I needed to believe in him. So I think that I never felt sorry for myself. There were times that were frustrating as all get out.
Yeah.
There were times that were just so maddening.
Yeah.
Not long, I'm going off topic, you can tell I go in circles, but not long after The Glass Castle came out, I got a call. I was still on the book tour, and I got an email. My name is Phyllis Owens. You probably don't remember me. I was your 9th grade English teacher. And of course I remember Mrs. Owens. She's one of those magical teachers who just cared passionately about students. Yeah. And she said, I've stopped teaching, but I stopped teaching high school. I'm working in colleges with future teachers, and I'm going to start using your book with kids who want to deal with poverty. And I have some questions that would be very useful if you would answer them. I said, I'm on my book tour right now, and I'll answer them as soon as I finish. And she said, they're due this Friday. And, and I pulled an all-nighter. Like spell check and grammar check. And she actually started touring on behalf of being my teacher. And she was confronted a couple of times, why didn't you realize Jeannette was poor, and why didn't you do something to help her? She said, I did realize she was poor. One time when I was working with her, I saw that her arms were dirty above her wrists. Yeah. And it flashed through my mind, Jeannette's not lazy, she doesn't have indoor plumbing. And her next thought was, this one is going to be okay. This one has so much drive that for me to interfere would do more damage than good. And she's been challenged on that. Like, how would you know? That was not your call to make. She said, I know because I grew up without indoor plumbing. And my father was illiterate. Yeah. And that is why I've dedicated myself. They said there were worse things than not having indoor plumbing. Jeannette has what it takes. And I'm still in touch with Mrs. Owens. She emails me all the time, right on with a W-R-I-T-U, right on, So I don't believe I ever felt sorry for myself. I did hide, and I did think that people wouldn't understand well into my adulthood. The shock for me of my book coming out is how kind and good people are. Wow. It has changed the world for me from a place filled with potential enemies to a place filled with friends. And I can meet a complete stranger and they'll say, girlfriend, you think you had a crazy childhood? Wait till you hear about mine, And they can be all Neiman Marcus'd out, and then they'll tell me about their mama being a cocktail waitress and their daddy being a truck driver and leaving one day. And life is just so filled with amazing stories. And sometimes people hide these stories, and they come up to me and they'll say, you're the first person I've ever told this. And I'm so ashamed, but I think you'd understand. And they're crying. And I'm hearing this beautiful story, and I think, why would you be ashamed of that? That's a beautiful story. And I remember, oh yeah, I was ashamed too. A very wise man once told me, secrets are a little bit like vampires. They suck the life out of you, but they can exist only in the darkness. Wow. Once they're exposed to the light, there's a moment of horror, but then poof, they lose their power. And I just found that to be so true. These things that haunted me, you put them in paper, and it's really scary when you first the book is coming out. I'm under a fetal position under the desk, people are just going to ridicule me. And now it's just something I went through. And there are so many of us out there that is shocking to me, and it takes you out of the isolation of your shame.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
You were saying you like doing research, and when you were writing The Glass Castle, I would assume you read other memoirs to get a feel for what to write about. And I'm reading other memoirs while writing about your book to compare writing styles, and a lot of them actually have very similar writing styles to yours. So I was just wondering what memoirs you read, or if you read any at all.
You're the one who's writing the paper, right?
Yes.
This exquisite human being is writing a paper on The Glass Castle. Your thesis, or your?
Yeah.
Yes. I looked at a number of memoirs when I was trying to write mine, including Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes, and then I realized while I was writing, Blarney was creeping into my book, my wee little brother. It's I don't talk like this, And Mary Carr writes these beautiful, long, eloquent, she's a poet, and these long, complicated sentences with profanity stuck in. And I don't write like that. I wrote the first version of The Glass Castle in 6 weeks and spent 5 years rewriting it. And those 5 years were spent trying to be honest and finding my voice. And that's the hardest thing, especially with a memoir, but with any writing. It's finding your voice, and that's partly being honest. And the first version, I wrote, my bad writing default mode is this kind of stilted, academic, journalistic, I'd heretofore not consider the plethora of influences, blah, blah, blah. And my agent said, you wrote this as though it happened to somebody else. You have to take the cellophane off and let people touch and taste it, and say how it affected you. I'm it didn't affect me at all. I'm perfectly normal. It didn't affect me at all. My advice to anybody who's trying to write a memoir is that's the toughest thing, is to find your voice. I don't know. I love Jeannette McCurdy's book. I thought that but it was such an interesting, I'm glad my mom is dead. And she has such a different story, and from a distance, she had everything. And I don't know if you think that her style was similar, but it was such a different story and so beautiful. I love memoirs. I'll read if anybody's willing to be honest. I'll listen. But the big challenge, I believe, is finding that voice, finding how you really feel. And I've been told by a couple of people who are working on their memoir that they studied mine and copied it. And I'm flattered, but I would not advise that. For any kind of writing, if you try to write if you try to write like James Joyce, you're just going to be a pale impersonation of him. You just find your own voice, and that's how you get through. And I found that when I wrote it as an adult looking back, I would pass judgment on my parents. It was only when I wrote it, changed the voice as a child, going through these things and witnessing them, that I could explain this kind of weird dichotomy of a life that was both beautiful and horrible.
As you were writing the book, what was it like for you emotionally? Because I think one of the amazing things about reading it, like you just said, is that there's so much humor in it. There's so much sadness and so much humor, and that's one of the things that just made it so incredible to me. But was it sad for you to go back and rewrite that? Was it a hard time in your life, or was it?
I'll tell you, the first time I read the book back, I was shocked. I'm like, dang, this is a little darker than I remember it being, There were times, my husband read an early version, and he said, if your parents weren't buying food for you, how did you survive? I'm like, I'm resourceful. He said, no, I don't know, Jeannette, you have to spell it out. Ain't no way I'm writing about digging around in the garbage for food. And I was a mess during that. I was just a mess. So it was different for each scene. I mean, some of it was joyful, and I did love my father, and I understand how damaged he was. It was excruciating writing it, but it was also the most cathartic thing I've ever done. And I think that the process of writing is the process of being honest. If you keep pushing yourself hard enough, and then you confront it and that's what happened. And my other bad writing default mode, when something isn't working, I'm just not getting deep enough. And that's true with Hang the Moon as well. I felt like whenever I'd gloss over something or be glib or resort to cliches or whatever, it's like, this isn't working, get deeper. So it was really hard. And anybody who's written a memoir will tell you that it's just, you relive these things, but then you own them. And like I said, it's just something that happened to you. And the number of people who come up and show me their arm where they burned themselves cooking oatmeal, or met somebody the other day who made her own braces. So, life is good. There's a bunch of us out there.
I have a question. You were in a position where you wrote a book that was popular, and then it was made into a movie, and you had some influence on the movie because you were there. What's your opinion on how the movie represented your book?
I love the movie. I know that a lot of fans of the book didn't. They didn't love it. They felt there was too much cut out, and but I love the director. I love the actor. I every time that the director made a change or a tweak, he'd explain why. They filmed the scene where Dad put us all in the back of the U-Haul, and the U-Haul doors flew open, and my brother's trying to close it, and they cut that scene. I was like, "Oh, Destin, how could you cut that scene? That was a great scene. And he said, that back to back, it would have come back to back with the swimming pool scene, and the two of those together felt like child abuse. And one of them had to go for length. So he said, he stayed with the swimming pool scene for causality, because because my dad caused that situation more than the U-Haul. And I feel I learned so much about storytelling, not just from the actors, but from Destin as well, the director. And like one time, they called me up, the set people called me up, and they said, we're working on the garbage pit. And we realized that the Walls garbage pit probably had different stuff in it than most people's garbage pits. So could you please describe to us what your garbage pit had in it? And I was like, I love this, the authenticity, the passion for getting it right. The lighting crew went down to West Virginia because it was actually shot in Montreal, and they copied the light. They said the light there was unique. They'd never seen light like that. So I was in awe. I loved it. And Hang the Moonspin option, well, my director told me, my agent told me, she said, there's too many characters and too much action. We can't turn this into a movie. So we wanted it a streaming series. And I'm loving this process. I have no interest in writing the screenplay. It's a different medium. I sometimes wonder if I'd grown up with a television, if I would have done movies instead, because it's so powerful. But I like the fact that they cut so many scenes from The Glass Castle, including there was a scene it was in New York Magazine, and these young people were playing journalists, and this woman was talking to me. It was her first scene ever in a movie, and she said, I talked to my dad about the 80s, and he explained to me what it was like back then. And it was like, and then they cut the scene, and it broke my heart. So there's too many moving parts in a movie. I didn't love that aspect, and when you cut something, it affects everybody, and I kind of hated that. So I love my writing, but it's a fascinating process. I'm also will be involved in the Hang the Moon, the streaming series. So I love it, but it's not my medium. Hope I answered that.
This is another question about the experience of movie making, and you kind of covered part of that. But I was just wondering, once you've had your writing turned into a movie or another visual media, does it impact the way that you write? Do you find yourself thinking about, oh, well, this character would look better like this, or this scene would take, if it was raining, or, do you know what I mean? Like, do you find
What an interesting question, yeah. I don't think I think in that terms, but having worked on the movie, you do, I think a little bit, you write a little bit more visually. I mean, I hope I've always written somewhat visually, but I also think that having worked on the movie, it really did teach me a lot about cause and effect, and I think a lot of these directors are smarter than a lot of writers, so they inform the way I think about storytelling. I hope they didn't completely change it, and I hope I'm not writing to the movie, but just thinking about scenes and where to end them and where to begin them. So I guess the short answer is kind of yes.
I felt like Sally was written with a lot of guilt.
Yes.
She was guilty about Eddie in the car. She was guilty about Eddie dying. She was guilty. She felt guilty when...
Spoiler alert.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I assume people have read it. I'm sorry. So I just want to know if you want to talk about, writing about guilt, but also who would you like to see play her in your series? Sally was very determined and very feisty, and she's kind of fearless, and I love Sally, but I also wanted to explain that I wanted to explore that there is a downside to that kind of determination and get things done. And if you think that you have the power to change things for the better, then you also have to take responsibility for when they don't. And the position of power and the pros and the cons. And so Sally's a very complicated woman. She carries around a lot of guilt. You asked another part that was really interesting. What was that? Oh, who would I like to see play? I would have never in 100 years cast Woody Harrelson as my dad. So and also Brie Larson as me. It's like, oh yeah, she looks just like me, right? But so we went out. We had a little lunch one time, and she's got these laser eyes. That's the thing about a lot of these actors. They see and hear everything. And at first in the conversation, she's kind of quiet and demure and not saying all that much. But by the end of the conversation, she's getting kind of loud and animated and gesturing kind of wildly, and she has this weird cackly laugh. And then I realized, oh, she's doing me, So I would not dare say, oh, I want this person to play it or whatever. But there was a performance, and I'm not even sure what her last name is. I'm not a big movie buff, but y'all will know who she is. I think I just remembered it. In Ozark, Julia, the one who played Ruth, Julia Garner, I think. And the first time I laid on that little sassy with her butt sticking up like that, and just like that tough but vulnerable. Wow. And she's nothing like that in life, but like that kind of just that understanding that often these tough people are so deeply hurt. And that kind of plays to the earlier part of your question, that these people who put on the tough facade and everything that they're carrying around and all the vulnerabilities. So anybody who can pull off that kind of performance, I would get weak in the knees for that. And these actors, again, on the Glass Castle, Sarah Snook played my sister Lori, and Lori didn't really want to meet with her, and Sarah was very respectful of that. But Sarah stood exactly like Lori did, and my brother and I, my sister has a way of standing that I've never seen anybody else stand, and Brian and I looked at each other like, how the heck did she know that? And we went up to her afterwards like, how did you know to stand like that? She goes, it was in the character, she said in her Australian accent. But these actors, finding the actual actor, I would actually love to have an unknown, but the actors just blow me away. It's something I do not have the capacity to do. So I bow, and I want to be very available to whoever, I was talking to the screenwriter. I actually just read the pilot, and it was so good. But I just want to be available for the actor to try to understand the character. That's all.
Okay, we could listen to you talk all night, but we have 2 more questions lined up. So here's one.
Thank you. Hi, I want to go back to when you said you felt love as a child and how important it is. It reminds me also of Dolly Parton's story, because that's what she said.
Dolly Parton's my hero. She's just my hero. Somebody asked her, somebody said to Dolly Parton, like, what do you want people to be saying about you 100 years from now? And she said, dang, don't she look pretty good for her age? It's the perfect answer, I love Dolly Parton, and I love her lack of spite. I love her songs, and she comes from a place of love. And she's kind of a hero, so thank you.
When you were a teenager, before you became a very famous writer, what were some book titles that inspired you as a reader? And what books do you think, and maybe they're the same titles, in addition to your own, of course, do you think teenagers today should read?
I read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn when I was like 10 years old, and it blew me away. I did not have a lot of friends. But little Francie Nolan also didn't have a lot of friends, and she wasn't very attractive and wasn't very popular, but she loved books. She had a drunk daddy, and her love of books and writing is what got her out of her situation. So I didn't have a whole lot of real friends, but Francie Nolan was my best friend. I also was blown away by The Grapes of Wrath. I just felt that the Judd family was the only family I'd ever known of that would not look down on the Walls family. And I loved it. And it was also one of the books that when I really thought about it, it gave me the courage to want to write fiction, because it's called fiction, but he, Steinbeck went and interviewed migrant workers and people who worked with him. So it was so inspirational to me, giving voice to these people. And so far as what I think people should read, I am just so delighted when anybody reads anything. I don't care what the genre is. I don't care if it's considered trash or YA or whatever. I just think get kids into reading. One time, when I was working on The Glass Castle, I thought, like, why am I doing this? Why am I exposing myself to what I was certain was going to be shame and humiliation? And any author who tells you they don't have a fantasy for their book is lying. Because writing is an excruciating process, so we tell ourselves stories. So I never dreamed of the bestseller list, or certainly didn't dream of a movie. My most first ambitious hope for it was that one day a rich kid would read it, and that rich kid would be a little bit nicer to those of us from the wrong side of the tracks. And then as I worked on a little bit longer, I developed the bolder and more ambitious hope, and that was that somebody who grew up like me would read it and would get hope the way I got from reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. The kids have been so smart about this book. But not long after the publication, I was approached by this young woman, long blonde hair, and she said she read it while her family was in the Caribbean, and I thought, ooh, there's my rich kid. And she said, there's a girl in my classroom, she wears these ugly, out-of-date clothes, and me and all the other cheerleaders make fun of her, and I will never make fun of her again. And I thought, the Lord can strike me down with lightning right now, because I have done my job on this planet. And then, not long after that, I was approached by a young man. He said, I hate books and I hate reading, but I enjoyed your story. And I said, if you hate books and reading, why'd you like this one? And he said, that there is a fine white trash story. And the woman behind him said, I believe that was meant as a compliment. But I took it as a compliment because, if a young man who thinks of himself as trash could read my story and say, hey, this makes me think of myself differently. And if a popular cheerleader can read the same book and say, hey, this makes me think of myself and others differently, that, my friends, is why we write. And I hope that is why we read, because to make these emotional connections and to tear down the barriers that we erect thinking we're protecting ourselves, that we're different from those people. That is the magic of storytelling. Thank you so much. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. You make me cry. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our first standing ovation at New Canaan Library. Y'all take care.